presentation probably is too long for the time allotted. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you could join us. I think there's still a few folks to join. It doesn't look like everyone is in the meeting yet, but we'll get started and hopefully those folks will be able to join us soon. Now I clicked off of my presentation. Can I get it back? Let's see. Christine, can you see the presentation?
We can, Karen.
Okay. So I'm going to, I can't see anything anymore. So if you can monitor folks coming in.
Yep, I can do that. And I got the chat for you.
And for some reason, I've screwed it up again. Whoops. There we go. Does that look right?
Yes, you're in business.
Okay, so we just want to go over a couple of things before we get started. So today's sessions will be recorded and posted to the web eventually. That's a bit of a process, so they probably won't be up today or tomorrow, but
I get this going.
Hello. We'll do our best to get them up as quick as possible. We're going to ask that throughout the presentation that you please keep your microphone muted and that you feel free to interrupt with any questions that you have. It's good to ask them during the presentation so that we can answer them as quickly as possible. So there's a chat function where you can type in your question, and Christine will be monitoring those and interrupt me so that I know there's a question to be answered. So let's get started. We also want to mention that there's multiple resources listed in this presentation and in all the presentations throughout the sessions today. So those will be located on the AOE website and we'll give instructions on how to find some of that. So that's listed here. Let's go over today's agenda. So this first presentation will be what we refer to as what is a CFP team leader. It kind of goes through some roles and responsibilities. Due to the limited time, of course, it doesn't go into every detail that we'd possibly like to share with you, but it kind of gives you an overview of those and gives you some resources that you can use in furthering your knowledge about roles. If you look at the agenda, the way it's laid out is we're going to try to stick to about 50 minutes per session with a 10-minute break in between. So we'll stop the recording and then start up again on the hour for the next session. We will break for lunch at 11:50 and not resume our next session until 12:30. So there is an opportunity for you all to step away from this at some point. And then we'll finish up about 3:30 this afternoon if we can all stay on schedule. So with that being said, let's jump in with some of the roles and responsibilities of a CFP team leader. So the first thing we wanted to mention to you all is that communication, coordination, and documentation are kind of the keys to this position. And it's very important that you're coordinating with all of these partners on a regular basis to be successful in the position. So we're going to talk a little bit about who those key factors are and what kind of communication you'll be having on the next couple of slides. So so there's communication, of course, between parents, community, school, and LEA leaders. And those that communication has to do with a lot of the planning of what you're going to do with these federal funds. So the law states in multiple places that there should be stakeholders involved in the creation of your continuous improvement plan, in your creation of the CFP application, in some of the requirements around Title I and so forth, and we'll go over a little more detail on those in the next few minutes. But it's also important, as some of you aren't brand new to the position, that you have coordination between you and the staff members within your office, specifically the business office. So the CFP application, unlike in years past, not only is an application for grant funds, but it's also the method in which we pay those monies back to you. So it's very important that you're in constant communication around how things are coded so that when you ask for reimbursement, those things are allowable for you to receive, because there's no do-overs. You know, if it's not in the application the right way, your business managers are going to be unable to request reimbursement. It's also important that you establish, I think I didn't exceed, there we go. It's also important that you don't leave out important folks like your data managers and those individuals. They're the ones that are going to be submitting data specifically around DC4 and DC6 collections, which we use in turn to, around eligibility for these funds. So there's lots of coordination going on. It's really important that you stay in constant communication with these folks. And then specifically, we're going to give you interpretations on rules, what the requirements are as laid out in ESSA. We're going to give you feedback about your grant, ask for further clarifications, and work as a partner with you to get those things right, so that there's not audit exceptions in your future, because nobody wants that. So some of the things specified in ESSA, there's some required communications. One of them is to disseminate your annual school or LEA report cards. That used to be an individual requirement where you actually created a document. A couple of years back, the agency embarked on a project to create the annual snapshot, so that we provide the data in which you feed us back to you in a format that you can use to share with your stakeholders. So, there's a piece of communication that has to be done. We ask it to be done in December for the previous year's data. So, that's one example. Another example is providing parent information about access to their child's achievements, and that also can be done through the snapshot. Excuse me. There's a part of ESSA that talks about notification for the right to opt out of federal or state or local assessments. We're not going to get into any of these and deep in the weeds right now, but just in general, to be aware that there's lots of communicative requirements throughout ESSA that you need to be aware of. And later, when we talk about the assurances, those are clearly outlined so that you can see concrete examples. Around Title I, there's some communication requirements. In Title I schools, you need to notify your parents of their right to request information about their qualifications of their children's teachers. In Title I schools, you need to notify parents if their child has been assigned a teacher who's not considered to be highly qualified and or hold the appropriate license for their grade level. So these are just some examples of this key component of communication. In parent and family engagement, this is specifically around Title I. There are sections of the law, and we've actually spelled them out here, where the LEA has to distribute information to parents and family members around their parent and family engagement policies. So, what we're kind of underscoring here is just that these types of requirements that you sign off on and the assurances are not those that you can just do in isolation. There's lots of places mentioned throughout ESSA in which you have to make sure that you have a stakeholder group of folks that includes parents and family members that would participate in the creation of those policies for your LEA and or your school. So Another one around parent and family engagement has to do with components of school level and parent and family engagement policy. And it has to do with the school parent, excuse me, the school parent compact, and how that outlines how parents and the entire school staff, including students, will share in the responsibility for the success of their children. Other areas in which we have outlined in this presentation have to do with communication in what we call the other programs, not because they're less important by any means. Title I seems to be heavily burdensome on a lot of requirements, whereas some of the other titles don't have quite as much. But for instance, if you're receiving Title III monies, and I think on the call today we might only have one school system that does, but you know, there is something in the regulations that make sure that this is that you outreach to your parents of your Title III students, and also homeless parents and guardians need to be informed of their educational opportunities, and that would include things like, you know, transportation and what other services are available to those children if the need arises. So just generally talking about communication, just trying to stress the point that there are many avenues in which ESSA requires this type of outreach. Won't dwell on it a whole lot, but just wanted to make you aware. Also want to make you aware that there's lots of resources out there that will help you with this type of work. So not that it's the funnest read in the world, but you all should probably take a good look at the actual act that oversees this money. So the Every Student Succeeds Act, and these are hyperlinked in the presentation. If any of you have experience with reading federal law, it's very cumbersome and confusing. So what the federal government has a tendency to do is write what we call non-regulatory guidance documents that kind of outline the responsibilities of that are outlined in ESSA in a more usable format. So currently, non-regulatory guidance on many topics. I've listed 8 here that you probably will find most useful. We don't have time to necessarily go through each one of these with a fine-tooth comb, but all of these topic areas will be covered throughout today's presentation. So you probably should kind of print these off and have these at the ready to understand the detail workings of each one of these pieces of the law. Okay, so let's jump into some of what you're kind of signing off as a CFP team leader. So first and foremost, you're going to create a grant application requiring you to Christine, do we have questions? Because I see a lot of chatter going on off on my phone, or are we okay for now?
So Karen, the questions are, will the PowerPoints be available? And I've answered that as, yes, they'll be available with the recordings on the AOE website. Some folks are asking if they can get the links now.
Yep.
So maybe,
So here's what we'll do.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Here's what we'll do. As soon as I finish this first presentation, I will email a link of all of these presentations out to you folks, so that you can write notes or do whatever you want to do with them prior to us posting them. So if you all give me a couple of minutes, you know, by 10 o'clock or so, I can get those out to you. Does that work?
I think that would be appreciative for the folks that are asking the questions. And I think we'll just have to, the team has to send them all to you.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure you have them all. So I guess the other team members that are on here, if you can email Karen your PowerPoint so that we can get it out to the field so they can keep notes. I think everybody would be very appreciative of that.
And if you've already sent it to me again so I have them all together, please. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. That's the only questions that are coming in so far.
Okay, great. So one of the things I didn't do is introduce our team, and I think that was a big oversight on my part. So I'm going to pause the presentation for just 1 second and try to do that. Let's see if I can manage this without screwing it all up. Maybe not. Well, we're going to do that at the end of this presentation because that's what makes sense right now. Sorry about that. So what I was saying was you're signing, you're applying for a grant to receive the title funds, which are funneled from the federal government through the Agency of Education. And as part of that, you sign assurances. Well, you sign multiple assurances, but specifically, we've laid out what we call the CFP assurances. So what we've done is we've gone through the law with a fine-tooth comb and pulled out all of the things that LEAs are responsible for and those things that the SEA, which is us, are responsible for, and kind of laid them out in a document to help guide you. So one of the things that we want to mention is, filling out the grant and getting that approved is a major part of your duty as CFP team leader, but you also have to ensure that all of those assurances are being met. So what we recommend, of course, is that you pull down a copy of those and that you make sure that all of the administrators, both at the LEA and school level, have a copy of those. And we recommend that be done in September or October, if that works for you. And then also making sure that those individuals all know what they're responsible for and what they've committed to. So, kind of having a checklist of who's responsible for what and who is the keeper of that documentation. Oftentimes, it might be assumed that so-and-so has that documentation, but you as a CFP team leader are asked to kind of be the gatekeeper for those things because we frequently need to ask for it, whether it be on an on-site monitoring, which we've kind of stopped doing for the time being because of COVID-19. We do a lot of virtual or desk monitoring now, or in a focused monitoring, we may ask you to provide us documentation of a specific topic that's in the CFP assurances. So just in general, to kind of come up with a system in which you are sharing that information with the folks that should be aware of it, and that you're understanding what your responsibilities are within the assurances, and that you're keeping documentation of what's in there. So unfortunately, the assurances is like 14 pages long. So this is very, very teeny, and it's just a snippet of what's in there. But these are the types of things. We tried to write them in language that's easily understood, unlike the law, and it really lays out for each section what the requirements are. So unfortunately, during today's presentation, we don't have a huge amount of time allotted to any one of these. And like I said, there's 14 pages of them and they're posted on the website. But please take the time to look through them. And if you don't understand what is being asked, please reach out to us and we can help you understand that, because you don't want to be caught up in a monitoring situation in which you said, I wasn't aware of that, or we don't have documentation of that, because, we want to get ahead of these things. So like I said, most of these things are listed through the presentations that you'll hear today. But it is good that everyone takes the time to kind of review them and be aware of what's out there. Another tool that we created to kind of help keep you abreast of what your responsibilities are is what we call the CFP timeline. And so this document we created based upon, if you look at the entire year. So we think about filling out the application and submitting it, by July 1st. But any of you that have had any experience in this realm know that that's really just one piece of many that you're responsible for. And really, the CFP responsibilities kind of occur throughout an entire year. That doesn't mean that you as a CFP team leader are ultimately responsible for all of those, but there may be things that your business manager or your data manager may be required to submit to keep you on track as far as CFP is as a whole. So the timeline has deadlines in it, and I want to mention that these are kind of what we call best case scenario deadlines. So we recommend you do something in a particular month, and some of those are hard deadlines, but a lot of those, as we all know, and especially with COVID, are control. So, I just want to state that we might promise to get something to you by a particular deadline and be unable to meet it. We also understand that you may be unable to meet a deadline that we've posted in this. So this is just a guidance document. Within the document, things are broken down into 4 types of categories. So we have grants management activities, professional development, monitoring, and data requests. And we'll look at an example of the timeline in just a minute. In addition, we've also included things of when you can expect information from us. So it might not be a hard deadline for you to get something into us, but it might be when you can expect something from us. And in general, it's just a tool that will help you plan for the upcoming year. I want to mention that during one of the afternoon presentations, we'll be joined by Jennifer Miller-Arsenault, and she is the curriculum director for Washington Central. So she's going to explain to you what this work looks like on her side. So it will be a helpful way to organize you. So the tool looks something like this. It will list a task. It will list the ideal month in which that task is either done or something is submitted, and then the category. So we don't have time necessarily to go through each one of these, and they are littered throughout the application, but this is a nice tool to make sure that when you're meeting with administrators and or business managers or other folks, that you're making sure that everybody knows when these things are due and who's responsible for them, and that will just help you organize your year. So this is just an example of what it looks like. Once again, this is posted to the web, so you can download it later to have at your desktop to remind you of those things. We want to mention that there are a couple of memos that have come out from the agency, and those have to do with expectations around certain circumstances that have come up. So in the past, we've had individuals request in their grant application to send teachers for professional development outside of the country. So the agency now requires that has pre-approval, and that pre-approval would have to be submitted to the Secretary of Education and then be approved before those activities were placed in the grant or funds obligated to those. So that too is a memo that's posted on the web from last year. So if you have questions or concerns about that, and this mainly has to do with the fact that as overseers of this money, we're supposed to ensure that we're spending it in the most cost-effective way. So, it could potentially be approved if you could, show us that that situation would be financially beneficial, unlike bringing someone perhaps to your LEA to provide a training activity. But anyway, I just wanted to make you aware of it because it's something that has come up in the past, so that you're not surprised by it if we notify you that you have to have approval for it. Another piece that we want to generally make you aware of is that federal funds, and this is what we refer to as supplement, not supplant, but that federal funds need to be used to supplement. And when we say supplement, we mean enhance, extend, increase those services, not supplant, meaning replace other sources of funds. So supplement, not supplant used to be fairly simple in that there was one regulation that kind of covered all the titles. well, not unfortunately, because actually the change to Title I actually makes it a little more flexible. So each of my colleagues will present a piece of this during their presentation specific to the title this afternoon to talk about how you would show supplement, not supplant in each of the titles. So I didn't want you to think we skipped over it, but it will be covered in the afternoon sessions. Another thing we want you to be aware of is when you transfer funds. So the law allows you to take up to 100% of title funds in either 2 or 4 and transfer them into titles 1, 2, 3 if you have a 3 allocation, 4 or 5. When you're doing this type of transfer, though, the law does require you to notify us 30 days prior to making the transfer. So we have created a form in which to make this a little bit easier, and it is posted to the web. But if you are choosing to transfer funds amongst the titles, you need to prepare for it in advance of submitting your application. This type of transfer is actually taking money from one title and placing it in another. It is not when we transfer funds into a consolidated funding source, such as school-wide, Con Admin, or REAP. So those types of transfers can happen within the application, and we do not require any type of notification. So these are only when you take, the title monies and move them on the allocation tab, which we'll go over in more detail this afternoon. Another thing as newbies to the CFP world, we want you to know of substantial approval. So for Title 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which is the grants we're talking about today, the original grant submission has what we call substantial approval at the time in which the superintendent submits the grant to us. So, or July 1st, whichever is later. So no grant can start before July 1 because that's the beginning of the fiscal year for the grant. Contrary to that, though, if you're doing an amendment, it's important to know that you cannot obligate any funds for the amendment until the grant is fully executed. And that means all the way through to the Secretary of Education signing off on it. So it's important to know the difference between those. And it's also important to know that not all grants the agency distributes follow these same rules. So we kind of given you this chart that kind of lays out the differences. And the other thing I wanted to mention with substantial approval for your original grant, that only holds true when it's an approvable investment. So if you submitted a grant on July 1, you can obligate funds for that, or you hold the risk of obligating funds for that, because if we then go back to you and say that's disallowable, the LEA holds the responsibility for that. So you have to kind of do it at your own risk. But what it does allow for you is if there are lots of back and forths with the grant, it will allow for you the opportunity to obligate some of those funds up front to cover things like maybe summer school or renewal of contracts with folks that are paid for throughout the grant. So wanted you to be aware of that. Wanted to talk a little bit about what type of monitoring you can expect from us throughout the year. So CFP does 2 types of monitoring on these federal monies. One is what we call the on-site monitoring. And during this monitoring, which of course this year would not happen on site, we would be looking at all of the CFP areas and do a thorough monitoring of every requirement that's in the assurances. Whereas we also do a couple, maybe 3 a year, of focused monitoring topics. So those are typically done as a desk audit, and they focus on those areas in which we've recognized that folks need more technical assistance on, or the field has asked us for additional help in those areas. So just to let you know, this year those areas have already been selected, and they happen to be comparability, equitable share, and somebody jump in.
Parent and family engagement.
Thank you. God. Parent and family engagement. So if you are one of the individuals selected for those, you will be notified from us. And the good news is those should all be housed in the grants management system to help us track all of the responses. So thank you, Christine. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about equitable services. So equitable services is not my forte. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the presentation, because I jumped over introductions, that our fearless assistant director was unable to join us today. He is out of town. As many of you might already know, Jesse Roy is our assistant director, and he oversees the CFP programs team. And he also is the state's ombudsman for equitable services. So I think a lot of you have probably had conversations with him recently around equitable share to do with ESSA. But this is going to be focused on equitable services within the CFP grant. So I'm going to try to do it justice. Bear with me. So equitable services is a requirement in ESSA, and it allows for aid to be given, meaning services to children in need, regardless of whether they attend a public or a private school. But for a private school to be eligible, they must be nonprofit, and they must be state accredited, or what we consider an approved or recognized elementary or secondary school in the state of Vermont. So there is a list of those, and it constantly changes, but we provide that to you in the spring so that you can look in your LEA and see if there are any new ones or ones that you haven't had previous consultation with. But essentially what it means is that you are going to reach out to those organizations and ask them if they choose to participate in the titles. And with that being said, there are charts within the application that will help you make a determination about how, what proportion of the allocation should be given to them in the form of services. But in general, for titles 2, 3, and 4, independent schools need to be reached out that are within your boundaries of your LEA. And like I said, we provide a list of those in the spring so that you're aware of who they are. But for Title I, there's a little bit of a kicker here. You would have to reach out to those independent schools within your boundaries, but you would also include students outside of your LEA that would normally reside, that reside in your LEA that attend a private school outside of your boundaries. So an example of that might be there's many folks that might send their children to Rice, which is the Catholic high school. So even though that is located in South Burlington, many of you may have to work through an allocation based upon a student from your district that might be attending that school. So we'll go over more detail this afternoon about how you come up with those equitable service calculations. But what I want to mention is there's some pretty hefty, documentation requirements. And this is one of the focused monitoring topics this year. So we want to go through those. So required documentation on this is written, signed affirmation of consultation within your independent schools within the boundaries of your LEA. So the written affirmation could be that the school chooses not to participate, or that the school did not respond to your request, or I do respond to your request, and we'll talk about what that letter needs to include in a minute. You also need to keep written evaluation of the effectiveness of the services that were provided, and what we call the year-end satisfaction survey. So at the end of the year, need to go back to those entities and say, you know, were you happy with what was provided? Were there problems and so forth? We call it the final survey. So some important things to kind of keep track of is that even though these are services that have a dollar figure attached to them, you're not actually giving money to the private school. You keep control of those funds. You're the fiscal agent of those. So it's your responsibility as the LEA to design and implement the programs, including procurement if needed, and it can't be delegated to the independent school. So you can't say to the independent school, okay, you want, you know, this training, we'll go out and find me, you know, who you want to provide it and so forth and so on. It has to be done at the LEA. Services can't be provided by an employee of the district or a third-party contract. And the LEA, this is important, controls all of the funds. So if there are materials or equipment or property purchased, those become, you know, the ownership is the LEA. So equitable services is pretty complex and there's lots and lots involved with it. And there's a wonderful document posted to the web that really lays out each one of the steps and what you're required to document and what you're required to do as far as consultation and other things. So once again, that's posted to the web and I recommend that you all read it. But let's go over a couple of questions to kind of get us into the mood of whether we kind of get this concept or not. So our
Karen?
first, yes.
We do have a question, and it may just been answered, but the question came in and maybe reading the documentation is the best source, but the question is, who does the evaluation of effectiveness?
Well, that would kind of be the both of you. You know, you can't do it in isolation if it's only occurring outside of your boundaries, but it would be something where you would potentially set up what the expectation is. So, Megan, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Could you give an example, like for instance, if someone were to have a professional development, what the expectation of collection of materials might look like in that example?
As far as effectiveness goes?
Yeah, sure.
We don't necessarily collect materials, but when you plan a professional development, you want to make sure that you're thinking about how you'll know that the professional development accomplished what you were looking to accomplish. So sometimes you might have some concrete proof. So if you're looking to improve, for example, assessment scores in math, and you do a training for your entire math faculty, obviously, you know, if you see an improvement in scores, you know that it was an effective training. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not.
So that kind of sets me up for answering the question. Thank you, Megan. So what I was trying to get at was those materials that Megan mentioned that you might look at as far as to show effectiveness would not necessarily be something that you would have as the LEA. So you would then ask for those materials to be submitted and then look at the effectiveness of those. I'm not sure if that helps the caller with the question or not. All right. We're going to keep moving on. If that didn't help, please ask again, or we'll circle back to it at the end of the presentation. So our first equitable service question is, do services for independent schools funded under these parts, meaning Title I, Title II, include professional development, including professional development, need to be the same for those funded for the public schools? All right, and the answer to this one would be no. This is where we get into the difference between equitable and equal. So services are considered equitable if they meet the specific needs of eligible children and staff based upon comparable to the public school children. All right, our next question. May an independent school enter into contracts directly with a third-party provider or purchase materials to be reimbursed with equitable share funds? So can the independent school send you a bill? And of course, the answer again is no. They don't have the authority to obligate or receive federal funds. Equitable services must remain at the LEA's control at all times. And additionally, the LEA is responsible for planning, procurement, purchasing, and implementing all of the funded activities. Our next question has to do with what should be discussed and signed and in the signed documentation of timely and meaningful consultation with an independent school. And we kind of breezed over this, so let's just go to the answer. And that would be how the eligible private school children have been identified, what services the LEA will offer to those eligible students, how and where and whom the services will be provided, and the satisfaction or concerns of the independent school with consultation on the proposed plan. So just reiterating that consultation just doesn't occur at the beginning of the year and then you're done. It happens throughout the year and of course at the end to make sure that the LEA is satisfied with the services provided. Whoops. And our final question, I think, are students that generate the proportional share of Title I Part A students from low-income families the only students that may access the eligible, the equitable services provided by the non-public school? So I should have actually not included this question because we really didn't go through that thoroughly yet. That's going to be in this afternoon's presentation. But of course, the answer to this one is no. So student eligibility for Title I with a private school is determined by the residency, the participating school attendance area, and the educational needs. So in this case, poverty is not a criteria for who actually receives the services. So that's the difference between determining the equitable share amount is driven on low income, but who actually gets served once the allocation is created is based upon the need of those individuals. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit. I think we have some business managers with us today. So we're going to talk a little bit about some fiscal considerations, just to make you aware of those. The first being the 35% flexibility rule. So if any of you have been with us long term, this used to be the 10% rule. And when the new grants management system was rolled out, we changed this, the agency changed this to be the 35% flexibility rule. So what that means is that within your grant application, so to stop you from having to do 1,500 amendments because, you know, something was slightly overspent, what this rule allows you to do is exceed spending from a single funding source within an object code. So Title I, Object Code 100 for personnel. You could exceed that amount of your grant by 35%, but it doesn't allow you to overspend the grant. So you would have to then have something where you didn't spend as much in another object code to cover it. So what you can't do with this, though, is that you can't change the what. So you can never exceed the total grant award and you can't change the what. So that means I can't, within the grant, say that I'm going to, you know, I was originally going to send 10 people and now I'm going to send 35 people to a training because you've changed the what of the grant. So let's do a couple of examples of this, but just keeping in mind the 35% rule applies to each funding source within a single object code. So let's give an example. So you have a grant award approved and it's for a 0.5 FTE teacher, and that cost of the teacher would be about $35,000 for the salary and $8,000 for benefits. When you wrote up your grant, you budgeted for what you thought would be a single individual's health plan, and then found out that that employee that you hired would actually chose a family plan. So you're increased the cost of $10,000, you know, up to $10,000 instead of the $8,000 that you originally planned for. So would this be an example of something that was allowable as far as the 35% rule? We want to mention that in this example that it's simplified and it assumes that there's no other benefit cost rolled up in that object code. So do people think this might meet that need? Be allowable with the 35% rule? And the answer is yes. And here's another example. So the grant award is approved to send 2 teachers to a professional development conference, and the cost is about $1,000 a piece for those. So you other spending in the grant was under the budgeted amounts, resulting in some extra money being available. So now you decided you're going to send 10 teachers to that, and that's going to increase the cost to $10,000. So would that be an allowable use? Would that be allowable to apply the 35% flexibility? And the answer is no, because the percentage first is over the 35% flexibility, but also in this example, it changed the what. Just because you underspent in a category doesn't mean you can overspend in a category if it's changing the what. So in this case, we changed from 2 teachers to 10 teachers. But of course, we also exceeded the 35%, so it's a double no on this case. I am running out of time, aren't I? All right, let's move along. Just want to mention that if you're a district that subgrants, you as an LEA can subgrant or pass through those monies to your member districts, but there's some key factors to pay attention to. So the grant is always going to be received at the SU level. And in this case, you're saying that the obligations are incurred at the district level. So important things to remember is that you need an official signed document by both the superintendent and the principal of the member district, and that within the grant, the correct coding for these funds that are subgranted would be object code 800 and function code 5510. So any of you that have budgetary experience would already know this, but for those of you that are new, this might be information that you didn't have. And I also want to talk about administrative caps. So the title funds allow you to designate a certain amount of money towards administration, and that can be both direct and indirect administration of the funds. So the caps for Title I and Title II is 10% of the allocation. And but unfortunately for Titles 3, 4, and 5, there is a 2% cap. So remember, those caps include both your administrative costs and for both direct and indirect. And that when you're doing consolidated admin, which is the direct charge, that the function code for all of those would be 2495, which is administration of grants. So we'll talk more about this afternoon and show you what it looks like actually in the grant award. Another important thing to mention is that for any of you that are claiming indirects, it's important that you make sure to apply for the maximum amount of indirect in your application. And we'll look at this afternoon also, because if you don't, you will get what's called a derived rate. So we will go over this in much greater detail this afternoon. But indirects aren't in addition to your allocation. They're part of your allocation. So you can choose to spend all of your money on direct services, or you can choose to spend a portion on direct services and a portion on indirects, but you don't get an additional percentage. It has to be rolled into the allocation. I just want to finish off with who to contact. So our team is quite large. Oftentimes folks reach out to me because I'm a familiar name, but there are actual individuals that are part of this team that are much more knowledgeable than I am. So here is a list of our direct team. And like I mentioned, Jesse, who is our assistant director and ombudsman, Christine, who's on the call today, it was our Title I and Title I Part A and Title I Part D state director, and she'll be doing our next presentation. Amber Graves, who is our Title I consultant, so she works with Christine. Miss Megan Kinlock, who is our Title II and our migrant education director, so she'll be giving a presentation on Title II a little bit later today. Jim McCobb, who is our Title III director. I do not believe Jim's on the call today because we didn't have very many Title III participants with us today. Katie Preston, who is our Title IV and homeless education director, and she'll be giving a detailed description on Title IV this afternoon. And then, of course, me. So there's our contact information. It's also important that you know that there are separate fiscal and finance monitoring contacts, and these are our folks, what we used to refer to upstairs as to who you should reach out to. And then any questions around your CIPs and so forth, go to the Education Quality Assurances, and these are the folks over there. You'll have a designated coordinator assigned to you. And then finally, when we have questions about the operation of the grants management system, this is the AOE help desk number. So, all right, I went over. Big shock. So I just wanted to open it up for just a couple of minutes if there was any questions. Remember, this particular presentation is kind of an overview, and we'll get into the weeds on a lot of these subjects later today. Christine, do we have any questions?
There are no questions at this time, Karen.
Okay, so to keep on schedule then, we can ask questions throughout the day. Don't worry about it. What I'm going to suggest is that we take our little first break and we come back right at 10 o'clock for Christine's presentation on Title I. Okay, thank you all for joining us. I'm sorry I rushed through the end of that.